He said, for the past 2 weeks, I couldn't even sleep 1 hour in full every night because my migraines were so strong, I just could not sleep. I've prayed several times for this. I've had other people pray for this, and it just hasn't gone away. As much as I would like to believe that it works, I don't believe it does. But then, he said, George came to me and he prayed for me. He said, I went home after that and I slept for 12 hours straight. Since then, I've slept every night and I've stopped my medication. I have to admit, I have no other option but to admit that prayer works.
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. This is Simon Gilbo with Inspired. If you're new to us, Inspired is all about meeting different mates of mine from across the spectrum of human experience that have had really interesting, crazy, difficult, challenging journeys, and how faith has played a key role in terms of them getting through. We're just so relentlessly bombarded by negativity in the press and this barrage of gloom and doom, and it just induces fear and anxiety and depression and cynicism. So at least 1 hour a week, we're going to counteract that. And I've got no doubt this week going to be inspired because we've got with us Lukas Ruegger. Hi, Lukas.
Hi, Simon. Good to be with you.
So good to have you, buddy. So I've been wanting to get this podcast for a long time. Lukas and I, our paths first crossed in 2010. And I'm just going to tell a little story here because it will encourage a whole bunch of you, I have no doubt. Because often our lives just don't go according to plan. And the reason I met Lukas was because our plans were going royally off-piste. So we are in Burundi, and we were planning to move to the States for a couple of years to launch our charity, Great Lakes Outreach in the States. And we got a visa for Lizzie, my wife, and my 2 kids that were out the womb, but she was pregnant with another one, Josiah. And when we got back to England and applied the formality of getting a visa for him, we were told that all our visas were illegitimate. So we had to go back to the drawing board, and it was just a horrible episode. This is 3 kids under the age of 4 in my lovely in-laws 2-bedroom apartment in winter. And I was just like, God, what's going on? Did we mishear you? But what that did to me was it took me back to all the scriptures on plans. And Proverbs 16 or Proverbs 19, many of the plans of a man's heart, it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. Commit to the Lord, whatever you do in your plans will succeed. Many of the plans of the man's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. And I think God essentially wanted me in that key season to learn a pretty fundamental lesson, which is basically, Simon, I'm God, you're not. And accept it, suck it up, and just journey with me. And once I learned that lesson, I felt released. And that was when a friend of ours, a mutual friend, Jill Ford, rang up from All Nations. She said, why don't you come up on staff temporarily? So we went up for a couple of terms, and actually it ended up being the best year, I reckon, of our marriage thus far. We weren't in the intensity of Burundi, and it was much lighter there being part of community. And Lukas was one of the great guys I had the chance to meet at All Nations. But there was a prayer. This is what I want to share, the prayer. Outside the Bible, this is my favorite prayer. And I ended up, the Lord I would be reduced to tears sometimes in the frustration of being out of control, saying, did we mishear you, Lord, in terms of going to America or whatever? Did we get it wrong? We're just trying to do your will. And this is a prayer by the Trappist monk Thomas Merton. He said this: my Lord God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I'm following your will does not mean I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does, in fact, please you. Oh, that prayer was just so powerful to me. And I think it will be powerful to a number of us because we are not in control of things. We go well off piste. And even right now, my life is in significant ways, the script is not being followed. And we've had some real sucker punches in the mix. But, you can pray that, God, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know where the road's leading. I don't know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I'm following your will doesn't mean I'm actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does, in fact, please you. And guys, if you're trying to please him, he's pleased. Just rest in the assurance of that. Don't give yourself a hard time. We see through a glass darkly. It's just life is challenging. There's lots of off-piste, sucker punches. And I know, as I talk to Lukas now, he's had a number of those. And life is messy. Well, certainly as soon as you go to a place like Beirut, you're going to have some crazy stuff going on. But it was a joy meeting him. I think I I taught or vaguely oversaw a preaching class that you were in, and I just saw
Yeah.
so much potential and gifting in you. So anyway, enough of me. But Lukas, he's got a podcast called Deflate. He is the director of Steiger Middle East. And he's got a creative team. They've launched an evangelistic storytelling platform in Arabic. It's got, I don't know, over 300,000 young people across the Arab world and beyond, maybe more. And you're in Beirut there with your lovely Denise. And at the time you didn't have kids. Now you've got kids. You can tell us about that as well. You're passionate about helping both skeptics and believers think through hard questions regarding the Christian faith. So enough from me, buddy. Give us a bit of context, background, upbringing, family. Go.
Sure. Thanks, Simon. So yes, we've been living in Beirut for the past 12 and a half years. And I can very much relate to the story you just shared and at the time when we met, because I can really say when Denise and I struggled through the question of what's next, that was 13 or 14 years ago after we headed back from All Nations from Bible College, we didn't really know what we should be doing next. And I hear these stories of other missionaries or people in the ministry who say, I had this peace about this decision about, I wanted to go to China or to Africa, and I just knew God wanted me there. And I could never relate to that. When we decided to go to Beirut, I always say I had this small grain of faith that I think I should be doing that, or we should be doing that, or that we would be doing something wrong if we didn't go. I had a little hunch that this is where we're supposed to be, but I had no not peace nor a sort of conviction that this is where God was calling us. But again, just trying to please God, trying to do the right thing, we thought, okay, we try and do this. And then landing in Beirut 12 and a half years ago was, identity crisis for a year. You don't know anybody. You learn the language. You're a nobody. You've got no network. You've got no impact, no ministry, no nothing. And then, well, after 3 years, after things started to pick up and the community we started to build really took shape, it was then when I could actually say, man, I don't just believe, I'm doing the right thing, or I did the right thing by coming to Beirut. But then came the time when I knew that we are at the place of our calling. But again, for 3 years, it was just kind of acting out faith, trying to follow where I believe God was leading us. Yeah, it was again. It was after 3 years that kind of that grain of faith was kind of confirmed and really grew into a plant that was visible. So yeah, we've been in Beirut, as I said, for some 12 plus years. We work with Steiger International. We're trying to reach young skeptics, students, entrepreneurs. We basically started a Bible study some 10 years ago in Starbucks Beirut for a Bible study for skeptics and non-believers. We had a bunch of atheist dudes join us, people who had their own atheist discussion clubs. And then at some point, these guys said, well, we should really bring our two groups together. You bring your Bible people and we bring our atheist intellectuals. And so we did that. We did that in our home. We gathered some 30 people in our home for a first discussion about whether religion is still relevant in the 21st century. And then later on, I was the leader of that atheist club. He asked me if I would want to take over his network because he was emigrating to Scotland to finish his studies. And I said, man, Elias, I'm not going to become an atheist, but I would love to take care of your people. And so he said, well, Lukas, I trust you. I know that you're serious about your faith in Jesus, but you're the person I trust most. So I want you to take care of my people. And so after that, our network just grew considerably. We would have people in our house every weekend, Saturday night till 2 a.m., talking about God and questions of faith and life. We organized debates with over 150 people. And then, so this whole network took shape. We would do camping trips and hiking trips and, art galleries together as a platform to start spiritual conversations. And
brilliant.
Yeah, as our apartment really couldn't hold the people anymore. We were living in central Beirut really at that time. And again, sometimes people would just be sitting on top of each other. We had our kids were very small at that point. It was crazy. Then we thought, well, given that we can't fit our network into our place anymore and we can gather people over 100 people for big discussions and debates, let's start our own platform, our own place. And so we opened a cafe 2 years ago. It's called The Living Room. And we've tried, or we were really consolidating and expanding the work that started back in Starbucks and in our apartment. Yeah, this whole thing is now kind of contained, or again, it's given a bigger platform with that coffee shop. And I've got Lebanese leaders in place that are really spearheading this movement now. And so, yeah, we're at a very good place at this stage. But again, it wasn't always easy. There were, 4 years ago, there was this big port explosion in Beirut, which really shook everything up.
Yeah.
Again, the journey of even coming to Beirut was one of like big uncertainty, and again, acting out in faith. And so, yeah, but that's where we're now, and we're very thankful.
Wonderful. Just going back in your faith journey, a bit background, what shaped you, key moments? Where are you from?
So good question. I'm originally from Switzerland. I grew up in a family where my parents were a believer. My dad was an Anabaptist preacher, but it took me till I was 20 years old to really make a personal commitment to Christ. I knew all along that if this was going to be my thing, if Christ was going to be my thing, I had to, this was on me to embrace, like, personally. And so, but it took me 20 years, until I really took that step. And what kept me to really get there was I was very passionate about social justice issues, and I felt like the church wasn't involved in that enough, and that kind of kept me at the distance. But I became a believer, and I felt like, well, I want to be all in, and that's how our journey started, to go to all nations and get prepped for ministry and all of that.
So you're in Lebanon, you're in Beirut. I know, I wasn't even sure if this podcast was going to go ahead because of, even you said last night you had missiles landing just a couple of miles away from you. So, I mean, just paint a picture of what it's like.
So, I mean, at the time of when we're recording this, it's 5 days or 6 days ago when Israel launched that big attack on the Hezbollah headquarters, where the Hezbollah chief Nasrallah was taken out. And since then, it's basically just daily bombings and attacks on the southern suburb of Beirut, which is like 4 miles away from where we're living. So we get to hear that. We got the drones over our heads 24/7. So then the Israeli ground invasion started 2 days ago. So we really don't know where all of this is going. And it's obviously not just a matter that affects Lebanon, but it affects the whole region. It seems like history is potentially being rewritten for the Middle East at this stage, with powers shifting. And I think it's so important, as you said kind of properly in your introduction. We're being bombarded with bad news all the time. And I think as followers of Jesus, it's so key. And this, again, especially at a time like this, when powers are being shifted and, wars and rumors of war, so important to, remind ourselves that Christ is on his throne. Christ is on his throne, and he laughs at what people who think of themselves as being big and being important do, and the moves and schemes they move forward with. Christ is king, and he's the Prince of Peace. Unless Christ, reigns in people's hearts, there will never be peace, whether it's in the Middle East or in the West. It doesn't matter. And I think it's so key for us to remind ourselves of that as we, again, read through the news and all of that.
Yeah. So where you are, me in Burundi, I mean, married with kids, but there were times when, people evacuated. But for me, I was like, we became Burundian. We chose to identify with our people. So we are not leaving. And I think lots of people would think you're crazy. Are you scared? I mean, I take comfort from, missionary heroes of mine, heroes of the faith from yesteryear. Some of them pack pack their belongings in their coffins because they knew they weren't coming back. And people that would say, "Aren't you afraid?" No, we died before we got here. That sort of level of commitment. Anyway, it's human to wrestle with fear. How are you and Denise doing on that level?
We're doing fine. I mean, it is far more stressful now than it used to be before. Having said that, I mean, Lebanon has always been unstable. Again, the port explosion 4 years ago. In fact, like 1 year into us being here, there was an explosion just, 2 miles from our first apartment. There was an assassination on a journalist or a politician, can't remember. I mean, at the time of ISIS, when ISIS was wreaking havoc in Syria, there were attacks I remember there was an attack on a Hezbollah hospital in Beirut. And I just visited that hospital I don't know, a week later or a week before, can't remember, I was visiting a friend who had an accident. So uncertainty is just part of life here. And I guess, again, here as Christians, it's really important for us to remember that like safety is not, where danger is absent, but it's being at the center of God's will. And I guess, we feel we're in the right place. We feel called to live and serve here. And that's what we want to pursue, even if life gets harder. Now, as a husband and father, it obviously gets a bit trickier. I have 3 kids, and they're doing pretty well. They understand. They can, they get the nuance of what is happening. 2 teenagers and 1 small one. Yeah, but still, it takes empathy, it takes real compassion for the family to do this well. It doesn't just mean, I'm called here, we'll just stick it out. No, you want to be Christ-like in actually caring for those around you in such a crisis.
Yeah. So go on, just tell us more about the ministry you've built up.
So a key milestone in building the ministry was kicking off this Bible study for skeptics. We started in Starbucks, Beirut. I basically started with 1 guy or 2 people. Sometimes they wouldn't show up, so I was by myself. But this thing then picked up, and we would quickly gather 15, sometimes 20 people in a cafe to basically just read 1 story or 1 chapter of the Bible, and then to open the space up for people to discuss. And what I've learned there is really it's the Word of God is powerful. And, even if you read uncomfortable texts, it is powerful. I once had a guy, his name is Yassine. He came, we had a debate, like again, one of those big debates a week before. And I would invite, after my talk, I would invite to the Bible study. And so he came. He was one of the guys who followed and came to the Bible study. And so he came, and this is how he introduced himself. I came here because I heard Lukas speak last week at this event. I discovered at the age of 14 that I'm gay. And so I figured I can't have any involvement with God and the God stuff. But after having heard Lukas speak, I thought, I want to give this thing another chance. And so this is how he introduced himself. And we said at that night, we were going to read Genesis 18 and 19, which is about Sodom and Gomorrah, God's judgment on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we had such a good conversation about, again, sin, even with this guy, and sexuality, homosexuality. It was so good. Yeah, there's another story of a guy. So we would be sitting in this cafe, we wouldn't have like our own space, like booked. We would just be sitting in the public area. And one time this guy passes by us and like walking to the bathroom, to the restroom. And he later on said, "Man, Lukas, I walked past you and I felt like electrified. There was this power coming out from your group." So I walked into the bathroom. I knew I wanted to speak to you guys, but I didn't know how. So I practiced in front of the mirror. He said, I came out, and then he asked us, "Well, guys, I felt there's this vibe around you. Who are you?" And then one of my people holds up. So he asked, "Are you guys a literature club?" And so one of the guys holds up a Bible and says, "Well, we're kind of a literature club. We just read this book." And so he was visibly shocked. This guy was visibly shocked. He said, "Oh man, I'm an atheist, but I love your vibe. Can I join you?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. And take my number. Let's have a chat, and you join next week if you want." And so this is not about me, but this is about what God can do when you step out in faith.
Yeah.
He said, "When you talk to me, it was as if the whole coffee shop went dark and there was this light on your face. When you spoke to me, you really had this light on your face. And I just knew, man, I needed to join you." He was a key figure in this atheist club we started to partner with later on. And at the first discussion in our house that we organized with the atheists, again, the topic was, is religion still relevant in the 21st century? And so I made introduction. I said, "Well, guys, let's keep this civil and whatnot and respectable." And then I said, "Well, the floor is open. Who wants to kick off?" And so this guy, Hassan, who saw this light thing and who walked past us in the coffee shop, he said, "Well, I want to go first." And he says, "You guys all know I was raised a Muslim, but you also know I couldn't care less about Islam. I don't think this religion has anything to offer to us. You also know I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God, but," and then he goes on to say, "but ever since I've met Lukas's group," these are the words he used, "I'm forced to conclude that as far as Christianity is concerned, it is highly relevant because I cannot get past the way these guys have welcomed me and treated me is just way beyond anything else I've ever experienced. So even though I'm an atheist, Christianity at least is still highly relevant. So these are some of the stories. Then again, we would gather people for, in other contexts, for again hiking trips, just to create safe spaces for people to open up spiritually. And at some point, again, as I said, we would have a network that was big enough where we felt comfortable to say, well, let's start our own space. And so now we've got this cafe where we run regular events as we used to back in the days, but it's now a more public platform. And we've got the similar stories just repeating itself. It's just beautiful to watch. Yeah.
I love picturing you guys in the cafe having this discussion. How's it gone on?
Yeah. So at this stage, we offer on average some 4 to 5 events a week.
Mm-hmm.
And they're really we're trying to accomplish different kind of sub goals here. One is just an event that would initiate relationships, like trivia night. There's a regular trivia night happening, just bringing people together for having a good time, bringing people together so we get to know them and build, again, relationships. These would also be things like, hikes. Again, we organize hikes where lots of people join, or movie nights. Then there are the more community building type of event where things go a bit deeper. These would be things like open mic events where people get up on stage and they share their poetry, they share, their songs, they share maybe a dance. And it's quite amazing how people open themselves up. And that's where you get to know just the stories of people. People are pretty honest on stage. I guess that's something with this generation too. They just like to, share their stories and put out their hurts and put out their anger and put out their frustration, which for us, again, creates an opportunity to really connect with these people. These would also be things like Readers Club. We've got a readers circle where it's fun. People bring their own books and everyone reads their own book in silence. Each person may have a very different book, and the leader reads a C.S. Lewis book or another book that is just conducive to good spiritual conversations. And then they have a time of sharing. Everyone shares what they've read. And it's cool. The leader, Jamie, she says oftentimes it happens that what she is reading, again, in Mere Christianity or some other book that, again, has like a spiritual author or like a Christian author or something. She says oftentimes there's a link between what she's reading and what other people are reading in a completely, secular book about, I don't know, marketing or leadership or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then obviously we keep doing those, discussion events. They keep happening. We've got Bible studies. And what we've also started, and that's partly because I recruited like a Lebanese person who's got a background in that, is we started events and workshops that are related to mental health. Because,
mm-hmm.
Ever since, again, we mentioned the port explosion on the 4th of August, 2020, which is really the time, like a milestone moment in Lebanese history. There's like Lebanon before that, and there's Lebanon after that.
Yeah. I mean, I can remember it. I remember it.
Yeah.
It was August, wasn't it? I remember being on holiday in France and watching it on TV. And just saying this in case people didn't see it, it was the most spectacular, massive explosion of some chemical arms thing in the port, and mind-blowing. So you were there for that?
We were there. My wife was in the car. I mean, everyone felt it. I mean, I sat in the kitchen with my kids. We were playing a board game, and it just the house was shaking. It was a huge blast, and you just knew something really big happened. And they say they could feel it in Cyprus, out in the Mediterranean. So the port explosion really it was this punch into the face of the Lebanese that said, well, the leaders of your country really don't care. They care so less that they didn't even protect you from, again, some chemical that was being stored in your own port that was going to be used for building weapons for probably Hezbollah. And since then, mental health and everything has just gone down the drains. I would say out of 10 young Lebanese before 2020, out of 10 Lebanese, probably some 4 would be seeing a therapist or, a psychiatrist or something.
Wow.
Now it's like 9 out of 10, if not 10 out of 10,
Wow.
or seeing a therapist, or at least they look like they need to see a therapist. It's just the national psyche is at rock bottom.
Destroyed.
And so I've got like one Lebanese team member I have, a young lady. She's majored in psychology, so she set up these workshops around mental health and anxiety, and this has been a great platform too to do, to minister to people. Obviously, you want to be careful with not abusing like a therapeutical relationship for winning people over in a bad way to the gospel. But where appropriate, definitely we want to use these conversations and connections to introduce people to God, who is the ultimate healer. So yeah, we've got the coffee shop is more than just a coffee shop. It's this event space. It's a community. We've got some 900 to 1,000 people on our WhatsApp group, like people who want to keep being updated. And funnily enough, here's a fun thing. We've had several people come to us, like at discussion events or open mics. They would walk into our coffee shop and say, "Well, I came here. I came here because my therapist recommended that I should be here in order to get better." Now, we've never connected to any.
Wow.
Yeah, we've never connected to any therapeutical institution or anything. But it's really happened several times that people, like for example, this guy Ali from a Muslim background, obviously, he would come to discussion nights regularly. Very smart guy, describes himself as an agnostic. But then the other day, after the event, he came to me and said, "Hey man, Lukas, I need to talk to you." And he said, "Man, I'm in such a dark place. I believe, whatever force is out there in the universe is against me. If there is a God, I think he hates me, or he wants my life to fail." And he said, "Man, Lukas, what do you have to tell me? How can you help me?" And it was obviously, this was, like the opportunity to share the gospel offered on a silver platter. And I told Ali, "Well, Ali, I want you to know I'm not a psychologist or a therapist. I'm a follower of Jesus. And what I'm going to tell you is just going to be related to my faith in Christ. That's all I have to offer to you." And he said, "Man, Lukas, just go ahead. I believe you can help me, or what you believe in can help me." So I shared the gospel with him. And he said, "Man, yes." And I encouraged him. I said, "Well, you need to pray to God to show you that he actually loves you, because I really believe he's passionate about you, and he wants to get you out of that darkness that you feel you're surrounded by." And then then he was one of the guys. He said, "Well, Lukas, why do you know why I came here initially?" He said, "Because my therapist, I see a therapist, and she told me that if I want to get better, I need to see people, and the best place to see people is the living room, your coffee shop." So that's how he came to our place, which is great. And yeah, even though again we never intentionally pursued any relationships with professional therapists or psychologists, these people are being sent to us. Yeah.
So you're seeing these people come to faith is it on a regular basis?
Yeah, it's for a person to come to make a commitment to Christ it takes a long time. And we've had, it does happen. We've had recently there was a guy who hopped along for a hike, and he was just, God prepared him. Like someone was pouring into his life before, was, watering and, really taking care of that plant that was growing. He said, "Man, I really want to know more about Jesus. Do you guys know something?" And then we said, "Well, basically, we have a Bible study. Come to our Bible study." He came to the Bible study. He's Ahmad from a Shiite background. And 3 weeks later, he was so ready. We handed him over to a church. We said, "Well, you should really attend the church. You're welcome to come here, but go to church, attend Sunday service." And then he just a bit later he committed to Christ and got baptized. Similarly, a girl that walked into our shop just asking questions. She somehow knew that we were Christians. She wanted to know more. She talked to our staff, and then a bit later she got baptized in a church. Yeah, but, it happens. Wonderful. But really, these are not glorious stories of people, showing up and suddenly, oh no, they feel they are hit by something. It takes a long time. we really need to walk with people, especially because many of them have been so hurt by their experience with the religious crowd. I mean, in the Middle East, there's just this unholy marriage between everything that is political with everything that is religious. It's just so extremely ugly. And this means that people really, you start with kind of undoing the damage that people have experienced with religious people. That's where you start with. And then you get them to zero, where they're at the point of, oh, okay, now I understand religion is not all bad. Here's a guy who believes in Jesus and he's a pretty decent guy. And then you build from there. So it takes a long time. It takes trust to build, and it takes a real authentic relationship as a platform for faith to grow.
Yeah, and I think I'm right in saying that Lebanon is slightly different from a lot of the Middle East in terms of coexisting interreligious communities, and also freedom. You've got greater freedom, not total freedom, but greater freedom. Is that right? Yes,
that's definitely true. I mean, Lebanon is the exception in the Middle East in that you can evangelize, you can talk to people on the streets about Jesus, and there is a more like the community, the Lebanese society is more multi-religious and multicultural. I mean, there has been a strong Catholic presence in this country, a strong Orthodox presence, and so people are used to, well, just being exposed to different, beliefs and worldviews, and the government officially allows, for these conversations to happen. That doesn't mean that in terms of family, people have all the freedom they enjoy in the West. I mean, if like people from a Muslim background become believers in Jesus, it like depending on their family background, it can still have rough repercussions. It's not a walk in the park. Yeah, depending on your parents and depending on the larger community you're part of.
Mm. Hey folks, most of you know that this podcast comes out under the auspices of Great Lakes Outreach, which is a charity we started 20 plus years ago, working in Burundi, which is currently the hungriest country in the world and either the poorest or second poorest, vying with South Sudan. So it's in a hell of a mess, desperate needs. And listen, as we come up towards Christmas, I think of Alice, who I did a film of, she's a Mutwa pygmy, very, very poor, and her 6-year-old daughter was sick, and she knew she needed to get her to the hospital, but she couldn't afford the few pounds it would take to do that. So she tried to scrounge some money off her neighbours. They were equally poor. They couldn't. So she set about making a clay pot, which is what her trade was, and it took her 2 days to make that pot. And in the meantime, her 6-year-old daughter died. Oh, it just makes me, mixture of emotions, sad, angry, all sorts, because for the lack of those few pounds, that precious 6-year-old died. That is so wrong. In Burundi, we can provide for £3.50 or $4, we can provide people with a medical card that means that when they go to the hospital, they get treated immediately. It lasts a year, £3.50. or £4 covers the whole family. And what I love about this appeal at Christmas is that my kids can afford to get one. They get 1 or 3 or 5 or 10. Would you be interested in doing that? If you'd like to help a family to have peace this Christmas and the coming year, knowing that they won't, or their loved ones won't die for the lack of just a few pennies, then go to greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. And also, if you wanted, for example, their alternative Christmas gifts, when I'm asked at Christmas, what do you want by loved ones? I say, look, just get me some reusable sanitary pads for girls for £10 for a pack there, or a goat for £25, or a bike for a rural pastor for £70, or £150 will get a sewing machine so that woman can get out of prostitution. I mean, what's not to like? So those are just a few of the alternative gifts that we offer this Christmas time. If you'd like to, again, greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. Thanks so much for your consideration. Thanks so much for your support and encouragement in general of this podcast. Now, let's get back to it. So what are the key factors in a person's spiritual journey that, in your context, that nudge them towards Jesus?
In our experience, it is really key for people to have an experience of authentic Christian love in community. As much as our people, like the people we've ministered to, they've asked hard questions that were crying for apologetics answers or apologetics type of answers. Oftentimes people, what really pushes them forward in their journey is an experience of God's love or an experience of some supernatural intervention even. I mean, to tell you the story of one guy who was part of our community for a long time, he was from a very hardcore, radical Islamic background, like raised in a very radical family. And I don't even know how he joined our community, but he joined. He came along to the Bible study. And at the time, there was this other guy who would be regularly joining, who was from the streets. He lived on the streets. He didn't have an own home. He would smell. Yeah, it was a very tough person to handle, even socially, just difficult to interact. So here's what this other Muslim guy said after a while. He said, Lukas, you guys have, repeatedly talked about God being love. I always hear you guys talking about God being love, which first of all, it's kind of a hard concept for me to grasp as a Muslim. But also, I really never understood what you meant, and how you would tie it to the Trinity and all of this and Christ dying on the cross and whatnot. I simply never understood what it means for you to say that God is love. It just never clicked. But he said, and then after I saw you guys, the believers in our group interacting with Muhammad, was this homeless guy who would be joining us regularly. He said, that's when it clicked. He said, I couldn't even tell why. But for some reason, you guys handling this guy the way you did and interacting with him the way you did, no one would do that. No one would ever talk to him the way that you guys talked to him. And for some reason, I now understand, and that's what he said, I now understand what Christians say when they say that God is love, because I've seen it. So I think it's really, it's key for us as followers of Jesus to, we want to preach the word. We want to be, very clear and open about our message, but people are going to watch us. So it's just beautiful to know that as we open ourselves to God's Spirit, to, I mean, I'm no perfect person and I'm not always loving, but at least, God, if I open myself up to God, he can do something in me that people will see and take as a pointer to God's love. I also think, as I said, sometimes people just need an experience. And yeah, another story kind of that exemplifies what it really takes for a person to walk, towards Christ is, the story of our friend Sam. He, like a very smart guy, super solid intellectually, would ask all these really hard questions, really good questions. And he really needed answers. He said, man, Lucas, I really want to figure this faith thing out. And so far, I've never had anyone give me good answers. And I can't, unless these things make sense, I will never be able to do this faith thing. And so Sam and I would meet regularly for lunch at Burger King. And he would come with this list of questions and ask me through it. And so this was important for him to get some good answers to some of the questions he was having. But then, so at some point he came to me and said, well, Lucas, at this stage, I've come to a point where Christianity makes sense. This thing, I think it makes sense. You guys have given me the answers I was looking for. And he said, I now realize if I want to become a believer. So he was counting the costs. I love that. Here was a guy really counting the cost of following Christ. He said, there is one thing now that I still struggle with. He said, if I were to become a Christian, I need to believe that prayer works. And I just can't get myself to believe that prayer works. I think it's just a good, mental exercise, talking yourself into something. But I just can't make myself believe that it works. So he said, if this final thing gets answered, I think I would have an easier time committing. I said, man, Sam, this is a legit question. Even Christians sometimes wonder whether their prayers are being heard or getting answered. That's a really honest question to ask. But I also said, I can't give you an answer. I mean, I can't tell you that prayer works. You need to experience this. So I'm just going to be praying for you that God would somehow, show up in your life, or that he would somehow answer a prayer, that you could get an answer to that, objection, that final objection still standing. Now, here's what happened. Like some 2 weeks later at the Bible study, we read through, I can't remember which passage it was, but it brought up the question of predetermination and whether prayer makes sense and all of that. And so Sam was very quiet that night. He would he wouldn't share lots. He would always share just one or two things, but it would always be very profound. So he was quiet the whole night. At the end of the night, he says, "Well, guys, you know, it was nice with you what you all shared, but I don't believe that prayer works." And because he had this medical condition, he had like he used to have very strong migraines.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, I've got these migraine attacks, and I've prayed several times for this. I've had other people pray for this, and it just hasn't gone away. So I can't, as much as I would like to believe that it works, I don't believe it does. Okay. At the end of the night, one of my friends goes over to him and says, "Hey, Sam, can I pray for you?" And Sam says, "Well, sure, pray for me. Again, if it doesn't help, it won't hurt at least." So my friend George prays for Sam and just prays for healing over him. Now, a week later, after that Bible study evening, I was scheduled for lunch again with Sam in Burger King. So I'm waiting at the counter in the restaurant for him. Sam walks in. He walks straight up to me and says, "Hey, Lucas, hi, how are you? I need to ask you a question." I said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." He said, "For the past 2 weeks, I was not able to sleep I couldn't even sleep 1 hour in full every night because my migraines were so strong, I just could not sleep." He said on a scale from 0 to 10, if 0 was completely painless and 10 was so painful that I would like to kill myself, he said I was constantly on a 9 or 9.5. I did not sleep for more than 1 hour every night. But then he said, last week, you at the Bible study, we talked about this, blah, blah, blah. George came to me and he prayed for me. He said, I went home after that. I fell on my bed and I slept for 12 hours straight. And and he said, since then, I've slept every night like a rock. And I've stopped my medication. And then he says, "Why do you believe that is, Lucas?" So I said, "Well, let's order our burgers, and then I'll ask you for you to answer that question." And at the end of our conversation, he said, "Yes, I actually believe. I have to admit, I have no other option but to admit that prayer works." And so this is how his final objection was answered. He still had a bit of ups and downs after that, but at this stage, he's committed at a church. He's asking, it's like George, the same guy who prayed for him, so he attends that church. He's asking to help out. He's asking questions about how he can share his faith. He's praying for other people. It's beautiful. God has really taken him on a transformative journey that has addressed both the questions he used to have in his head, but then also the experiences that he was lacking to really for this whole thing to click. And so what I would say is, yeah, people need good answers to the questions they have. And, we should do our best to give satisfying and nuanced and honest answers when people are asking. But also, let's be clear that, people want to and need to experience that how God touches them. And that should be the focus of our prayer, for God to really, move in people's lives. And it doesn't have to be like a supernatural and healing type of thing, but in some way or another, as the other story shows, people want to see God's love in action, whether it be it in community, whether it be it through a healing, whether it be it through someone who just, one person who listens to them and who spends time with them. That's what's going to make people feel like, oh man, what these guys have is so soothing, so beautiful. Like there must be truth to that. That's people, we want to bring people to a point where they make experiences with God's people or with the Holy Spirit in a way that they say, man, I wish this thing was true. If and then you tell them why it is true, and that's what really pulls them to Christ.
From our experience in Burundi, which is actually contrary to yours, ours is a majority sort of Catholic nation, but there's a substantial Muslim minority. For those Muslims that we've seen come to faith in decent numbers, it usually involves a dream, a vision, a dramatic healing. They might go to the witch doctor, they go to the imam, it doesn't work, and they come to Jesus, and we zina ya Yesu, in Jesus' name, they get healed. But it takes something dramatic, usually takes something dramatic. And also I think the dramatic nature is what enables them to count the cost, because leaving Islam is extremely costly, isn't it? So can you speak into that?
Yeah, I can. There's this one guy I met. We were friends. I think I met him at the university. He was wrestling with what is true. His mom was from a nominal Christian background, and his dad was also from a radical Muslim background. And so he was just honestly, wrestling with the question of, okay, what is really true? What should I follow? Where should I kind of place my trust in? He read the Quran. So he read through the Quran. He thought, okay, I do my due diligence. I read both books. So he read the Quran. And then after that, he read the Old Testament. That's how far he's got. So in his struggle and in his journey. And then he says, there was this one night when I went out on the balcony in the middle of the night. It was all dark. And he said, and then I see these words written on the sky with fiery letters, with letters of fire, which say, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word will never pass away. He hadn't read the New Testament at that point. I mean, that's from Matthew 24.
Beautiful.
And he said, well, I didn't quite know what it meant, and then he moves on to read the New Testament and then comes to Matthew 24. And that's where he sees what he's already seen up in the sky. And that was, monumental type of experience. Yeah. I have to say though, Simon, here's the thing. I mean, as you say, these experiences can be really key in certain people's journeys, but it doesn't always mean that it leads people to a commitment in Christ. Mm-hmm. Because a person may through such an experience come to the knowledge of, oh, wow, I think this is true. I mean, this must be true. But at this stage, a person may have consent to the truth of the gospel, but that doesn't mean that they've embraced the gospel as, and become followers of Christ, that they actually follow it. I mean, I've had people, I know a person who's been dramatically healed, a Muslim lady, young girl who was dramatically healed from cancer. But after that, she counted her cost, and she did not commit to following Christ, even though she knew. I mean, she would tell me, I know that Christ healed me, but she has not become his follower because, again, there's a cost to that. As sad or as kind of dramatic as it is true. There is a real cost, to following Jesus.
So are you winding things up now in your time there?
Yes, we are. Our oldest is turning 14 next year. And at the same time, our ministry is at this stage almost entirely led by Lebanese. My wife and I are the only non-Lebanese left among the ranks. And that's really the key decisions are being taken by Lebanese leaders. And so it's really time for us to step out of the way and to give the new leaders the chance to take this whole thing forward. And so we do believe it's the right time for us to step back, both again to give way and to give space to the Lebanese leaders to take this thing forward, and for us to give our kids the opportunity to plug into the Swiss education system just before it's too late, in order for them to be able to kind of build, to get educated or to get on track in Swiss society and in a Swiss market. I mean, again, our ministry in Beirut is being handed over. The process should be done by the end of December. And then in summer 2025, we'll be heading back to Switzerland, Lord willing. My plan is still to be involved in the Middle East. We're planning on opening a second cafe in Jordan, in Amman, in the capital there. We've got something lined up for Dubai, like a little bit smaller still. And then we're like something exciting. We're trying to kick something off in Saudi Arabia. We're heading to a festival there with a team of Lebanese evangelists in December, just to like trying to strike conversations there with young Saudis. They've got this really big music festival. It's called Soundstorm. Eminem is performing and Muse is performing. And so we're creating this NGO, like a storytelling type of NGO, an NGO that, well, it's as a cover for us to get there. Capturing people's stories, giving people a voice on screen. And for us, it will obviously be an opportunity to really get to people's stories and then pick those up and hopefully be able to share the gospel. So yeah, I would like to keep my involvement in the Middle East, and with the network I've built, I'm excited to see what's possible and what God can do. But in terms of Beirut, we're wrapping things up, and then again, Lord willing, we'll be back in Switzerland after 13 plus years in summer 2025.
Wonderful. Well, I mean, our stories are quite similar on that level. I loved it when I left after, 20 years of Burundi, and I just sensed the Lord. It was also kids. Our oldest needed to get back into the English educational system, and I'd handed on to this local guy. I love the fact that you got all local ownership of it. That's so good. With my guy, I'd asked to take over the ministry. I still describe him as the most amazing man I've ever met. And part of the beautiful confirmation was that I'd asked him to take it over. He was considering it. And then a pastor whose 5 kids had strayed, and this guy had led 4 of the 5 kids back and discipled them into leadership roles in the church. That pastor had fasted 40 days, praying, Lord, give me a word from you to encourage and thank Onesphore for what he's done in my 4 kids' lives. And he didn't know me. And he came and said to Onesphore, the Lord's at the end of 40 days, the Lord's told me 2 things. One is that you're to leave what you're doing, which in the natural didn't make sense because he was running this thriving ministry. The other thing is that he's given you a twin to change the nation with called Simon. And I was like, what? I mean, it was so extraordinary and specific. And so there was a lovely sense of leaving, of completion, and the next generation taking things on. And I see that in what you're doing as well. So it's just beautiful, Lukas. Lord, we're just cheering you and Denise and the kids on your next chapter. Close out well, and close out well also for us now. Any last words for us? Go for it.
Well, just as I said before, Christ is King. Let us, make him King in our hearts. He's the Prince of Peace. If anyone, those around us, if they are to find peace and just real fulfillment, they need to meet Christ. And it means that we as his ambassadors need to enthrone him as King in our hearts. And then he'll do his work, and he'll use us and work through us to draw those around him to us, not because we're so good or because we're so cool, but because he's amazing and he's gracious and powerful, even in our weakness.
Amen. Well, look, I'll put your details in the chat so that people can check you out and see the work, and just cheering you on all the way. Thanks for your time, Lukas.
Yeah, thanks. It was great to be with you, Simon.
Wonderful. Folks, please give us a great review on Spotify, iTunes, gossip this podcast with people you think would be good for them to hear it. It's been a great time. Next week, we've got another fantastic guest, a very different story. I want to thank Adam Thomas Deer for the editing, Mike Sandeman for the mixing. In the meantime, God bless you loads. Have a good week, and toodaloo.